This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension, we were in Standing Finance Committee. We revert to Standing Finance Committee.
When the suspension was taken, we were examining head 81. To this, we now revert. Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first wish to, of course, congratulate new Minister of this ministry, now acting Prime Minister, on her assumption of this very important position. I'm aware of the study that would have been mentioned this morning by the Deputy Chief Technical Officer, which spoke to 70% of the roads in Barbados in 2017 being in a state of disrepair, either bad or poor. And therefore the state of the roads, mediocre as many are in this island, would have predated this administration. And I accept that it is a Herculean task to repair all the roads in Barbados that need repairing. But the fact is, sir, that I've been elected by the people of St. James North to represent their interests in this House. And I have to say that the roads in St. James North are, generally speaking, in an abysmal and embarrassing state. Now, I want to commend the depot in St. Peter, Mangrove St. Peter, for trying their best to patch up some roads. I'm in contact with that depot or with workers of the Ministry of Public Works on a twice-weekly basis to try to get some roads repaired, patched up, whatever. I must say, Honourable Minister, that one of the constraints is that I am told in many cases that they don't have the equipment available to repair the roads or to patch them up, or that vehicles have broken down. And I'm aware, yes, that again we came into office in 2018 with these constraints, lack of vehicles, an aging fleet in virtually every ministry, but it is something I would trust that some of the $110 million odd dollars being allocated to this ministry would be used to replace vehicles, because after a time you can't keep repairing them. I also take note of what the Deputy Chief Technical Officer said this morning, that the ministry tries to fix the worst roads first. I submit that some of the roads in St. James North are among the worst in Barbados. Honourable Minister, you are fully aware, and we have spoken, that as soon as I was aware you were now having a responsibility for this ministry, I wrote for 19 roads that to be repaired. And these are the same 19 roads, Mr. Chairman, that I have been writing the Ministry of Public Works on for exactly 10 years, because it was 10 years this month that I was nominated to be the candidate for St. James North. So for 10 years I've been writing various ministers of both administrations, of course, for repairs to these 19 roads. The first one, of course, Rotterdam Main Road. We were given the opportunity by the Honourable Prime Minister within 2 months, 3 months of coming into office, of naming one road in 2018 which we would wish repaired if it was to be one road. Rockdunder Road has not been touched whatsoever. I know also Mr. Trudeau saying that repairs of roads started in the south of Barbados. Clearly they haven't reached St. James North yet. And the reality is St. James North is not in the Scotland district, so he's not going to get the benefit of the Chinese loan, which other constituencies in the north would get. So, as I said, it's an embarrassment. The one thing that the opposition party and I agreed on during the campaign last month was that the roads in St. James North are in a terrible state. And the thing, just like the Honourable Member for St. Thomas before me, the constituents, my constituents feel that I have a responsibility to repair the roads and can't accept that I can't get any of these 19 roads repaired. I thank you in anticipation, Honourable Minister, Acting Prime Minister, that for the tour that I have requested you take with me of the constituency to show you the state of these 19 roads. But I think I'm asking for some assurance from your ministry that some of these roads would be repaired and reconstructed within the next financial year, because none of these 19 roads were tackled whatsoever in this financial year. And the people of St. James North, who have sent me here, are becoming very frustrated that none of these roads are being repaired. And I'm asking if your ministry, Acting Prime Minister, could give me an indication, or give the people of St. James North through this Parliament an indication of what roads are intended to be repaired, reconstructed, because some can be patched during the next financial year with the estimates that this Parliament will be allocating to this ministry. That's my first question.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I know you said that you submitted a list of about 19 roads, but it looked more like about 40 or 50 that were submitted. And therefore, I have asked the team to, on a serious note, to look at it very carefully. I can tell you that in the upcoming CAF program, the road relating to Hangman Hill, St. Thomas, Rockdundas Road, St. James is actually being done. Again, the budget for this is over $1 million. And I think that speaks again to the state of the road, which you are obviously concerned about and the residents are obviously concerned about, but it also speaks to the level of work that has to be done on a lot of these roads in terms of the road rehabilitation. So I just want to assure you that it's not the only road that will be done. But obviously we have to prioritize, and with a road that is going to cost $1 million, I'm sure that on your list there are certainly others that will obviously be in that price range. What I continue to ask members of Parliament to do is to really just prioritize the roads that are in the worst condition, accepting that we cannot do all at the same time, but obviously, let us look to see if we can try to do the ones that perhaps are of most concern to you in the constituencies. And then each year we can try to do a bit more as well. I'll ask Mr. Trudeau just to speak on the general roads in St. James North, perhaps to give you a better idea of exactly why those haven't been done, and obviously some of the other plans for the area as well.
Yeah, good afternoon once again. It's unfortunate Representative Hinkson that we weren't able to get this in James North. We actually stopped in St. James South. So I believe that you'll be next in line. You'll be next in line to be to repaired. For example,
after St. Lucie.
Pardon me?
After St. Lucie.
Right. Because we did roads, for example, Olive Lodge Road, Derry Meadows Road, Nichols Road, Tulip Drive, Halls Village, Jordan's Road and Risk Road. All those roads were in St. James. You gave us a list, I think about a year ago, that had on 8 roads, including Mount Stanford, Reservoir Road, Graves Road, Zion Hill, Tenantry, Barks Road, Ashton Hall, Clarks Road, Carbon Road. Those were 8 roads. And when we determined how much it would cost, it was coming between $2.5 to $3 billion just for those 8 roads. Now, you submitted 12 more roads after that. So with 20 roads to be repaired in your constituency alone, you know, it's going to be a bit of a challenge to determine, as I said, which road in your constituency we can start first. But rest assured, sir, that we are coming to St. James North, and your roads will be tackled, hopefully, in the new financial year. Anything else?
I would also like the honourable member to be aware that Salters Tenantry Road in St. Michael's Southeast was budgeted since 2008, and work only started last week. Now, that is not to say it has been any way acceptable, but simply to say to you that we have to appreciate as representatives the limited resources in some cases, and obviously how sometimes resources are reallocated depending as well on the conditions of the road. So I hope that you will be like me in the next coming months, where you can be rejoiceful with your constituents that we have started some progress towards your over 40, 50 roads, and that we can get to you as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I only asked for some equity in this process. I know that we have a lot of roads that need repairing, but I don't want St. James North to be forgotten. My second issue, Mr. Chairman, relates to water and water zones. And at the outset, I would wish to commend the management of Barbados Water Authority, Mr. Halliday, General Manager Dr. Wanza, on their timely response to issues whenever I contact them. That is the truth. And when public officers do good, they need to be commended. Invariably, within a day, once I let them know of burst pipes or whatever in my constituency, they are repaired. But quite honestly, it should not take a member of parliament to have to call the authority for this to happen, because invariably constituents tell me what I called BWA a month ago, 6 weeks ago. In one case, when I was canvassing last month, it was 3 months ago, and the matter wasn't addressed. But when I contacted, the next day it was addressed. And I don't think that if we have a customer service department at a Barbados Water Authority, this should be happening. Constituents need to be taken seriously, and not only members of parliament. But my issue relates, Mr. Chairman, to the water zones. My constituency is one of the main constituencies that has serious, significant problems in terms of many of the areas being Zone 1 areas, and therefore an prohibition to have indoor water-borne toilets, or in fact water facilities at all. And again, this is an issue that has addressed my attention for the last 10 years, the time I became candidate for St. James North. And I know that we have legislation laid before Parliament on this issue to redefine some areas out of Zone 1, reclassify them, and I am just concerned as, again, all through election constituents in areas such as the Wim and Aston Hall and parts of Rotdunda especially have been asking, when will they be allowed to get water in their houses and indoor waterborne toilet facilities? 'Cause this is a basic fundamental right for people. I don't know all the technical aspects. I would think that in 2022, we could have systems that would allow it, which would not compromise the integrity of our water systems to the detriment of the general population. But I am patiently waiting for some of these areas to be taken out of Zone 1 and for accommodation to be made. So I'm just wondering, Honourable Acting Prime Minister, through you, if one of your officers could speak to the areas in St. James North which will hopefully in the near future be no longer under the prohibition of Zone 1.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I think you correctly stated that the order paper does reflect changes to the water zone protection legislation. I think the regulations are very clear. Members of the public would have had the opportunity to peruse that. We at the ministry have taken the opportunity to obviously go back through it, make sure that once the legislation is passed, that there is a proper opportunity to enforce. But of course, it has to come to Parliament first, and hopefully after the estimates, we will be able to do so in the shortest of time. I will ask Dr. Mwanza, though, who is the Special Advisor to the Barbados Water Authority, to just speak generally about the water zones issue in terms of contextualizing what you were speaking about, and certainly to address the issue of what is anticipated going forward for those persons who have traditionally lived in Zone 1 areas.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. My name is John Mwanza. I'm Technical Advisor to the Barbados Water Authority. With regard to the zoning system, we have to recognize that to protect our groundwater resources, some of the measures that have to be undertaken actually relate to waste disposal and land use practices. Our aquifer is open to anything that happens on land. Can be washed down through the soil, through the coral, to reach our groundwater. So we need to manage what we do on the land surface. Even with the revisions that are being proposed, there will still be Zone A where no new services will be provided, and the only developments that will still be allowed in Zone A will be related to water production related activities. In Zone B, which is mostly the area that is being freed out of the existing Zone 1, that is where we will be allowing for some new developments. We still have to consider the density that we allow. Because, for example, if you put a teaspoon of sugar in a gallon of water, you will not taste it. But that does not mean the sugar is not in the gallon. But if you put 5 spoons of sugar in that same gallon of water, you will taste the sugar. It is the same thing with the groundwater quality. We have to manage the concentration of any of the parameters that are getting into our groundwater. And we could only do that by controlling the land uses. Granted, you could use new technologies to treat the water, but that is at an extra expense and cost to the user. So we will be, as the Deputy Prime Minister just indicated, as part of the implementation process, we have prepared a public education campaign which will be rolled out, which will speak to what will be allowed and the impact on the persons living in the specific zones. That will come out as soon as we have the matter passed in Parliament. Thank you.
Chairman, my last intervention relates to drainage, flooding in St. James North. Of course, St. James North is a coastal constituency. It's low-lying. Some areas are maybe just above or even below sea level. Trents, for example. I wish to thank the Ministry of Public Works, and it would have started under the immediate past minister, the Member of Parliament, Honourable Member of Parliament for St. Michael West Central, for work being done as we speak. I believe, certainly it was going on up to last week in Sion Hill, to try to alleviate the flooding problem there. Along the highway in Sion Hill, going down Braffitts Road, etc., where properties were flooded out a few years ago. But trench is an absolutely major problem, and the Honourable Prime Minister would have toured parts of St. James North with me in September last year to look at infrastructural problems. And the last place I would have taken Honourable Prime Minister was in Trent, and she would have directed the Ministry of Public Works to come up with a solution within a month of that tour, because after 5 minutes of heavy rainfall, Trent is like a river or lake. You need boats to get out of there. At the very least, you need a boat. It is not a condition in which human beings should be living in. This problem, yes, has predated my election as Member of Parliament for about 50 years, but it falls on the lot of this administration to try and resolve it. And there are other areas. Trent is just, of course, the prime one. There's also areas in Roadview where in 2017, with the passage of a storm, houses were flooded out. So there are general problems in a coastal constituency that St. James North is. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Chairman, if through you, the Ministry of Public Works can give this House, and by extension my constituents, an update as to alleviation of flooding problems in St. James North, drainage issues. And I also note, sir, that the building code just would want an update as to where the ministry is at in terms of formal legislation and enforcement of a modern-day building code. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'm going to ask Mr. Charles Yearwood, who's the Senior Technical Officer in Drainage, who would have been familiar with the area, to just report to you and to the residents of St. James North.
Good afternoon. Charles here with Senior Technical Officer, Drainage Division. The question on drainage in St. James North is similar to what happens along the west coast, general west coast of Barbados. You have higher elevations of lands, predominantly were agricultural lands, draining or conveying of water from the upper lands to the coastal area, which are low-lying. In other words, you don't have much of the lands in the coastal area are less than 5 meters above sea level. In the case of the ones that just come onto the road, less than just about 2 meters. So that the traditional methods of disposing of storm water are difficult to achieve any level of efficiency given we use salt wells. we're aware of, and there are a number of areas or hotspots along the south coast, particularly from Six Bends to Black Rock, in which we've tried to tackle over time. The change in, or the movement away from growing sugar cane has impacted us negatively. Much of our lands above the area, above the first cliff, are now compacted because of much of them are used for grasses. The area of Trents, Western, Fix Village, Spikestown has been the attention of the Drainage Division since the 95 drainage study. However, the issue specifically to St. James North, we've identified a number of areas in that constituency or communities that are affected by flooding. We've got Clark's Avenue, which affect the roadway there in just downstream of Mount Barbator. Last year, we constructed a retention pond as part of the 2024 ponds we did in the last financial year, not this financial year. This financial year, well, we had, yes, it's true, we had the tour with the minister, Prime Minister, and the representative in his constituency, and we were given a mandate to get a solution in a month. When we reviewed what was happening in Trents, Trents is like a small rice bowl. It's shallow, it's wide. But much of the water comes from Greenwich Village and the lands above. And what we attempted to do was to look at for solutions upstream that would reduce the flow down into Trents. Now, we've done that almost at quick pace within that same month. And part of and we added the we found a detention pond, very shallow one opposite north of the Carrot Road to Frederick Smith School, primary school. And we added that to the 24 we're currently doing. It's a significant portion of it is complete now. And I'm happy to say that I report that the Trents detention pond has been cleaned, regraded, deepened to hold additional water. That is just one of 3 watersheds that affect Trents. We thought initially then that we could have a pump house. When we looked at the solution, we require a pump house. It's a very tight neighborhood. We don't have the space for a pump house. We may have to use a well. And then we have to have a recurrent cost of electricity. The approach is to use gravity feed, use systems where we don't have a dependency on energy. In the case of Western, there's a structure that is very close to the watercourse near the intersection with common to Highway 1. And the proposal is to try to acquire that land to provide a greater conveyance capacity through the watercourse under the road towards the sea. In terms of Zion Hill, yes, you did mention Zion Hill. We've completed the works at to almost prevent the road flooding at Zion Hill Junction, in that we've done some work on Braffett's Road. But in Trent, the wider area of Zion Hill, the plantations of Tates and Upper Tates, Zion Hill plantation, flow through that same junction. And the geometry of the watercourse is so narrow coming through the houses, we decided that we'll go for a detention pond upstream. We've just completed that, but we'll have to do additional works this year to create a short check dam, no higher than 5 feet. That will give us additional storage. It will mitigate the flooding, but we have a watercourse that comes through between the houses and turn a right angle, and we have to do additional works there. So we're happy to report that we've got significant reduction for flooding at Trents, and this Trents South. Trents North comes through the old Brathwaite, the old property with the weddings. But again, the lands, we have to find areas in which we create retention ponds and reduce that water. The intention therefore is to, in some way, consider the alternatives to regrade the road at Trent to drop the flood level, because in the rice bowl, if you drop the lip, you will have a lower flood height. That is yet in discussion, because we have to look at services, and it's going to take a longer time to get a solution. But surely in terms of detention ponds upstream, they will reduce the water coming from upstream into the areas. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it was the issue of the building code that I raised as well too.
Honourable member, you would have had your 3 allotted questions. I'm sure that one of your colleagues would raise that issue with respect to the building code. Honourable member for St. Michael South.
Thank you so much, Chair. I intend to be very brief. I want to begin also on drainage, but I want to say thanks really to the Drainage Department for what I think thus far has been an excellent job. I recall when we came into office, the amount of unnecessary flooding that we experienced in this country. And now, due to the work of drainage, a lot of that has been mitigated. And in fact, there are many places in my constituency that once used to flood that no longer flood because of the intervention of drainage. And so I just want to say thanks to the Drainage Department for what I think thus far has been an excellent job, and they continue to improve. My question, though, as it relates to drainage, is in relation, in many cases, to the grills on a lot of these culverts and so on. When we did our tour, St. Michael South, with the Prime Minister, we pointed out a number of grills in St. Michael South, and it's the case across Barbados, really. A lot of them are rusted, they're broken. You find cases where there are things stuck in between so as to alert the public that they're actually broken. And I'm just wondering if there is, actually on the night before the election, in the last meeting we had as a political party, a person came to me because she fell, her child fell in one of these broken grills that cover these culverts along the road. So I'm just wondering if there's plans to review these grills, because they really put a lot of people at risk. In my instance, of course, I'm very concerned about persons who are older, persons who have disabilities, and so on, children. So I'm just wondering, considering the work that was done to mitigate the flooding, is there going to be a program on grills? Because a lot of children and people are at risk. That's the first one. I have one more.
Thank you, Minister. Again, genuine concerns, I think, for all of us in terms of the safety of our residents and certainly constituents. As it relates to the cleaning, first of all, because I think before we get to the grill, there's the issue of the cleaning, which has obviously been done to a large extent by what would have initially been the ash workers, which are now the National Cleanup Campaign workers. I believe that they have been doing a significant job in trying to alleviate some of the issues. Obviously, there've been reports as to where there are concerns in relation to the grills. I think there have been challenges, and I can have the PS elaborate a bit more, but my understanding is that there have been challenges in terms of the replacement of the grills. But I do agree with you that there has to be now an approach which allows us to replace for the safety of persons who are traversing on the roads as well. PS comments?
Thanks, Deputy Prime Minister. I'll speak very briefly, but Mr. Yearwood is really the person who can elaborate on this. But I know that we've been trying to procure grills, certainly during this financial year. Sometimes we have the local persons who will make the grills for what I refer to as the residential or the secondary roads. And then you have those imported grills which are placed on the highways. But I must agree with the Honourable member in that a number of our grills are in a poor state of repair. And I will ask Mr. Yearwood and possibly Mr. Tudor to speak to the replacement program, especially those ones which are to be imported.
Yes, good afternoon again. In terms of we have two sets of grills, as the PS said. We have the imported ones and we have the locally made grills. as far as possible, you try to use the local welders and ironmongers to do most of the grill work. The problem is that a lot of these grills the metal is soft. So we find that within months, especially when you have heavy traffic going over them, they tend to bend, they tend to break sometimes. So the imported grills is the better grill to use since they're cast iron and they last much longer than the local ones. But we obviously the imported grills you need for foreign exchange and stuff to import these things. So we have been taking out the grills and more or less repairing them and putting them back in place. But as fast as you can put them back in place, they bend or they break again. So we have to actively look at other ways that we can use to more or less design a better grill that can withstand the traffic loading that we currently experience in Barbados. I don't know if Mr. Yearwood wants to add anything extra.
Yes, thanks, the CTO operations. Again, Deputy Prime Minister and others. I think the question was focused more on maintenance. I got it in more. The question was begging the question as to what we're going to do about maintenance. Yes, it is true. The grills holding up and the materials is one of a concern where they may bend and cause damage to vehicles and injury to persons. In the case of the maintenance, though, the Drainage Division had in the order of 130 persons, laborers overtime, prior to 2007. We had a neat program that was closed. And then we are down to 40% of our labor. Sorry, we lost 40% of our labor, down to 60% of our labor. The asphalt program started and then they moved towards cleaning. And much of the work they've done has helped drainage only in part. It's helped with clearing the verges on the side where water can store. It helps in visibility. It helps in movement of water along the slippers. But what has not helped significantly is in cleaning the drainage infrastructure underground. We have many culverts and closed box drains where you have sizes as small as 12 inches. Developers in the past have used smaller than required size. We require a 18-inch minimum diameter. And that's to be able to rod the culvert from both sides. The Drainage Division has used four teams of the asphalt persons to focus specifically on cleaning grills under the road in hotspot areas. We also have a jetter truck, which has been down for some time at Simpson Motors, and we expect to get it back very soon. But the issue has to do with how can we tackle many of the culverts and get the water to the wells. Our approach, we cannot do it in the short term. We tend to clean the manholes or the grills closest to the well so that the water can get into the well. We've got the type of work done by labor is not one in which is a clean operation. Many persons see what they do. But during COVID, we've had challenges. We've had to still stick with the persons going out in. We had vehicles before persons will get to the locations. Sometimes the persons come late or so, and the challenge that we decide to let them come to the office or pick them up at strategic locations and take them to spots. Because whereas you can clean a road in the same location in a day, or hotspots, sometimes the teams can clean the areas in half a day, in 2 hours, and then move to another area. So we need to be able to move the teams, 4 teams, across the island in areas that are known to be hotspots. We have the reduction of community persons who will assist with flooding in the immediate area and outside of the yards, where they would clean it. We are seeing less numbers. I can speak of Watton particularly and of Spikestown. So that those persons before would have come and say, look, before the rain season, we need to have a vehicle to move the material. And we have to twin our activities also with a call for public participation in cleaning around their areas. They're the ones whose vegetation and leaves and soil go into the same grills. So we asking for them to be come forward and help and assistance in cleaning in front of the yards. When you grow up, that's what we did. Every Saturday morning, you go in front of your house, and Mommy told us, well, look, we had to clean in front of our yards. You sweep it down, you put the material back into the garden. It doesn't happen. It happens very insignificantly now. So we are, the approach, the plan would be to use some of the asphalt teams, have them roll over into the new financial year, come in, have additional vehicle to transport, and we have 2, and then move the 2 teams by 2 vehicles across Barbados where we can tackle that. Apart from that, they also have some drainage teams at depots, who the depot supervisor, as he go around his district, recognize the need for drainage maintenance, and will use the teams. In that case, you've got in the order of 60 persons across 13 depots, so you're talking about a small number dealing with drainage in each district. Thank you.
I just want to add here too that in terms of our performance standards, we've been trying to have at least 200 culverts cleaned per month using the same former asphalt workers who are now the national cleanup workers. We try to work towards having at least 200 culverts cleaned on a monthly basis using this additional workforce. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Suffice it to say, though, that I think this grill issue is really, for most people in the community areas, an accident waiting to happen. For sure, when we were in Charleston, just my follow-up, Chair. When we were in Charleston, the situation in Charleston is that there's at least a foot between persons' houses or their lands and the road where they have to step over. I mean, you were there, Mr. Yearwood, you would have seen it. And we promised that we would have grills so at least the children wouldn't have to make a leap from the road onto their property. And then the residents had complained that that area hadn't been cleaned, some of them in their lifetime. But anyways, I do hope that is resolved, but I do think the grill issue needs resolution. The second question is a more specific question. The sargassum season is on us, as we know. It's never easy dealing with sargassum seaweed, especially in areas where it is extremely heavy, like River Bay. And the situation at River Bay at one point was compounded because the Water Authority had, Chair, you might be happy to hear this question actually, the Water Authority had a pipe that was buried along the water course in River Bay. We visited it, and the pipe was literally standing between the seaweed that comes in and the water that comes down, and therefore the area wasn't able to flush itself. And I'm just wondering if there's been any progress on that. I know we would have met there about a year ago now. And of course, when the seaweed season is out, it really doesn't matter because there's no seaweed. But in seaweed season, the residents in that area complain tremendously about the stench because the seaweed obviously becomes, as it starts to become anaerobic, it becomes a little bit difficult to inhale. So I'm just wondering if there's been any progress made in relation to that, and the Water Authority was to make some adjustment, and I don't know if it has been done, and I would like to know on behalf of the residents of St. Lucie, because I know the seaweed really is a challenging thing for them.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. I'll ask Dr. Charles Leslie, Director of Engineering, to respond to you.
Good morning, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this point. In the River Bay area, yes, we do have a 6-inch main that is buried across the gully. We did return to that area, and we did some work in, we lowered the main in that area, and we also concreted around the main to secure the main into the riverbed. But what's happening there, because the riverbed, you have soil on both sides of the concrete. When the water comes down, eddies are created, and you have the continuous removal of the soft, silty material on both sides of the the concrete. So from time to time, we will have to revisit that, and I believe that eventually something will have to be done in terms of the actual channel, because once the channel is eroded on both sides of the main, that will have to be built back up. And we're going to be working with the Ministry of Public Works in terms of, because it will be then an issue of the drainage of the water out of that channel. But to answer your question, yes, we did return there. We did relay the main, and we concreted around the main to secure the main. But we will have to continually revisit that area until a more permanent structure could be in place over the main in that area.
No more questions, Chair. I hope that it's been resolved, because it really, really was a problem for months during the seaweed season. And I had thought that, I mean, I'm not an engineer, I had thought that the solution was not going to take as long or be as complicated. My conversations with residents in the area suggest that it hasn't been resolved in a manner that satisfies them. So I do hope it is a matter that gets the attention of the BWA to speedy and resolution that suits all parties. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. James Central.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the floor. I begin, sir, by saying to you that in the last, perhaps now 19, going 20 years that I have had the opportunity to go through this type of exercise, I have observed that when it comes to the Ministry of Public Works in particular, there's a temptation, sir, on the part of honourable members, and all of us are guilty of it to some extent, to go into the details of our particular constituency challenges, and that is understandable. What I think we have to come to the point of doing, sir, is avoiding the political self-stimulation of hoping that the members of our constituencies hear the fact that we have questioned a minister of Public Works about an aspect of the constituency road work or wells or whatever program. One gets the impression, sir, after listening to it every year for 20 years, that it becomes an almost masturbatory gratification process where we outline the quantum of problems without really steering conversation to the solutions. I believe, sir, that all of us could identify 30 roads in our constituency which need to be fixed. That is not really to help the process go forward very much, in my respectful view. I think, sir, that what I want to hear from the minister is a discussion about the systems and the processes and the policies which, and procedures, policies and procedures which exist in order to help avoid the kind of difficulty that the minister herself alluded to in her constituency. I can't remember the exact road you pointed us to, Minister, but I would give you in mind Riss Road. I came to the constituency of St. James Central to begin a process of securing a nomination in 2002, in December of 2002. The reality is, ma'am, that in December of 2021, Riss Road, which was a crisis situation in December of 2002 and was on the front burner of needing to be fixed. In December of 2021, it was fixed, 19 years later. Now, that tells me that it is really not just a question of pointing to this road need fixed, the next road need fixed, but there has to be some way of avoiding the plight of having a prioritized road or set of roads not being addressed adequately for 2 decades. That obviously crosses a plurality of government administrations. It speaks to a systemic failure, which you cannot be blamed for, Madam Minister, because you are nascent to the office. But it is something that I don't think we have given enough thought to. And what I'm hoping that I could hear from the team that you have there, some of whom have been around for that 20 years, is how can we as a country deal with this question of road repair and infrastructural maintenance in a way that does not see a district being bereft of attention for as long as 2 decades. That is the first question. The second one really is a very simple one. I know that there was a period of time when we had a system of demerit points which was intended to treat to the lawlessness that takes place on the roads of Barbados. I do not believe that there is such a thing as a culture of lawlessness. I feel that that is a term of, or that is an expression which really has been used to pass off on working class black people, especially those who are involved in business, a form of behavior or a form of, or pass off an excuse for failing them as a system. Again, the question is really one of how do we take public transportation in Barbados and make sure that it can be efficient and that the practitioners in that sphere are held accountable in the fullest way. Now, the question of demerit points, I believe, was written into the law, the road traffic regulations of Barbados. I stand to be subject, I am subject to correction on that, but I do believe that that is the case. It does not appear to be applied any longer, though it was at one stage applied. It would seem to me that if, Madam Minister, as I drew to your attention the other day by a WhatsApp, if we can have a public service vehicle turn broadside on the road in Baxter's Road so as to prevent another vehicle from overtaking it, and then after that vehicle points its nose in a more orderly and orthodox fashion, but is then subsequently overtaken by the other vehicle and a fight breaks out between people on board the two vehicles, we have a serious problem that we have to confront. That to me is an inescapable conclusion. But the question then is this: as a minister responsible for business, do I fall into that zone where I say, well, all of them is the same thing and you got a culture disorder? Or do we find a way that we can help people who are doing the right thing in the right way preserve their employment, while at the same time weeding out those people who are less than dedicated to trying to follow the prescripts of good practice and law? And I feel, ma'am, that the system of demerit points was designed to do exactly that. It was designed to say, if you are going to run afoul of the law, you stand to run the risk of getting this demerit. After a certain amount of demerit points, then you've had your chance repeatedly, and therefore you stand now to face the heavy weight of penalty, which may include loss of the license. But that don't just happen overnight. It allows the court process or whatever regulatory processes to work their way through, and people who are falling below a certain standard to know and to have time to adjust. That does not now happen in Barbados. And I would love to hear, ma'am, from your team as to what the thinking is. Not that they just go to work every day and see this happen and do nothing about it, but what is the thinking as to how we can bring some reparatory action to what is taking place on the roads of Barbados? I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Again, two very good questions. I think in essence you're asking in the first one, how do we plan accordingly, given that each of our members can certainly recite the number of roads and infrastructure that still needs to be done across each of their constituencies. And I think the simple approach or the simple answer, certainly for me as Minister, is that I will take the same approach in this ministry as I did in the Ministry of Education. I had a number of my colleagues who felt that their schools in their particular constituencies needed significant works to be done. However, I took a different approach, which was that we had to assess all of the schools, try to identify based on those reports and the audits that were done in collaboration, for instance, with the IDB at the time and the team within the Education Technical Management Unit, what were the priority schools? What were the things that we could assign to be done right away? What were the things that we were going to need larger funding for? And then to start the advocacy, in a sense, with the Ministry of Finance on the financing that was required in order to start the exercise of the repairs and the improvements to schools. Since coming to the ministry, I'm sure this entire team behind me can say to you that I have not given them my list of all the roads in St. Michael's Southeast that needs to be done. And it is because I practice what I preach. I am not going to be that kind of minister that says that they have to prioritize the roads in my constituency because I'm minister. But rather, I want to know across the country what are the priority roads that have to be done. And I will stick to that simply because I recognize that there are some situations where today there is a list of priority roads, but then we have, very heavy rainfall, and as a consequence, there are other roads that somehow go into the priority list all of a sudden. And so I think the system is really what you are speaking to in terms of how do we change this behavior, where we either assign roads to be done because the minister likes a certain set of colleagues, or that we assign roads to be done because the advocacy coming from one member of parliament is greater than the other, or that we rush to do works because the residents in the community have agitated sufficiently so that their voices could be heard. I believe that the ministry has to do better in its response to the concerns of residents across Barbados, and that can only really be done, whether it's from water to roads, it can only be done if we first have a clear indication of what the priorities are. That has to then be coupled with where do we access the funding in order to prioritize those roads. And so I don't think the first thing is how we organize it, but then the expenditure obviously is the other aspect of it that perhaps sometimes makes it a bit difficult, as Mr. Tudor would have said earlier, because sometimes you don't always get all the money that you wanted. I quoted a number of roads this morning that are over $1 million. And if I ask each MP for one road in their constituency, we at $30 million, okay? If we're talking about the main roads that really need work to be done. We simply don't have it. And so the behavior, the attitude towards this has to be one of priorities. It has to be one of explaining to the public as well what we have to spend, why we are prioritizing a particular area over another, and then being able to execute those projects in a time frame that is acceptable to persons. As I said before, my road in Southeast Salters, Tenetry Road, is but one that I've waited on to be done since 2008. And we've only now seen the light of day in relation to that. That took advocacy, that took the Prime Minister's intervention, but it also took heavy rains, creating a situation where the road started to open up in small craters. And certainly the team at the ministry then had to reprioritize in order to basically address that. So I simply say to you, I think it has to start with leadership. It has to start at the top in terms of how we approach these issues. And I will certainly take the same approach that I've done before to the other ministry, in this ministry, to have the team at the ministry prioritize the works accordingly. As it relates to the issue of demerit points, you should be aware that the regulations did speak to the issue of demerit points. I think as the Director of the Transport Authority indicated on Friday, one of the challenges has been enforcement, making sure that the authority had the necessary teeth to give that bite that was necessary to the operators. And what we are proposing shortly is to bring back to Cabinet some revised regulations, which will then, once passed, allow the authority to be able to implement not only the standards that are necessary and the training that is necessary for the drivers and the operators of these vehicles, but also where there are breaches, to be able to treat to those breaches and those offenses in a way that can be upheld in law. And so I therefore wish to say that the intention is there to correct a lot of the lawlessness that we see on our roads, and certainly to protect the road users in the manner in which we need to. But the challenge has been, I think, enforcement. I would like to think that we can accomplish that and break the culture certainly in this term. and bring an end to that minority, because it really is a minority of persons who are the offenders. And I don't feel that Peter should pay for Paul and Paul pay for all. I really feel that we have to now take an approach, as we've done across other sectors, and identify the chief offenders and go after them and make sure that we have the law on our side when we do so. I can ask the director of the Transport Authority. I don't know if she wishes to elaborate any further, but I'll let her intervene at this point.
Good afternoon to members of Parliament, Deputy Prime Minister. I believe that the Deputy Prime Minister adequately answered the question. It is one that we dealt with on Friday afternoon. And there's not much more that I believe I can say or will say, except to the fact that we need to treat the entire sector as a wider part of our society. And we need to ensure that whatever is done in the best interest of the society. But in some instances, we can't do it without the regulatory framework, which is what we need. And once that is in place, I'm sure that behavior patterns will be different. We will see a difference, because then we can start to enforce exactly what we have, and we can do so in a legal manner. I think that's about it. Thanks.
Perhaps, perhaps if I could, and I don't wish to necessarily use a third question, but I will, only to try to invite your team, Minister, to drill down a little bit more for my benefit. It may be my limitation. Simply put, what is the deficiency in the regulatory framework? Is the demerit system as it was designed originally inadequate? What are the reasons why it is not utilized? These are the things that I think we need to hear in order to better understand what the challenges are that are faced by the officials behind you.
I'm going to ask Mr. Knight to respond to you, Minister.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. In relation to the demerit point system.
CLO, you need to introduce
yourself,
your name, and your position. Thank you for the records.
Sorry. My name is Virgil Knight, Chief Licensing Officer, Barbados Licensing Authority. Okay, in relation to the demerit point system, there were some problems associated with the method of gathering information to assist with the enforcement of the legislation. Back in the day when we had about 15 transport inspectors, these persons were responsible for monitoring the roads of Barbados, and they will follow up with the courts to collect information on cases pertaining to some of the offenders. Now we have, 4 officers. One is on sick leave, so we have 3 active officers right now. And the problem we had then and now is the collection of the information from the courts. Unfortunately, we tried various ways of collecting the information. Actually, we were looking at back in 2014-15. Before we were looking at a system, an electronic system, which we can use to improve the collection of data so we can make informed and faster decisions. That system was not implemented at that time. I think that going forward we can revisit that so we can have a better system and a better way of enforcing the law which is on the statutory books. I think I would say that's as much as I would say at this time. Thank you.
Madam Minister, I will attempt to come back at another time. I can only say to you that Mr. Knight has been as he's only been precise to the extent that he has been vague. I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for St. Philip North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think two small comments, but first let me say I will not be one to complain with respect to my roles to the extent as many of the other members. I want to thank the Ministry of Transport and Works and Water Resources for all the help that was lent to me with respect to repair of my roads, and I know a few of the other roads are coming on stream for St. Philip North. One comment I would like to make, however, I am not sure if I can get an answer, but a comment will suffice. With respect to St. Philip North, we have, and I assume a couple of the other more rural constituencies, we have many roads slated as quote-unquote private roads. The genesis of St. Philip North, and I assume St. John, maybe St. George to some extent, we're in an area where it was essentially plantation land, and then this was handed down to families and bought over by families. And the roads remain, although they're private properties now, the roads have remained so-called private roads, and many of them have never been repaired or in disrepair, and although they're labeled as private roads, the public uses them, which I think is a little bit unreasonable. I had one experience where there was an accident on the main public road, and the public was asked to divert through private roads, and I really don't think that this is as fair as it could be. I have been given recommendations, and I did hand in some and working on others where the residents have agreed to give up a portion of their property in terms of 8 feet, the PS could correct me, on either side of the road. And some have agreed to that. But going forward, I would like to know the plans in correcting, which I think is a wrong, that these private roads are not addressed and fixed. That is my first question.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'm going to ask Mr. Tudor, perhaps, to respond.
Right. Yeah, good afternoon. Private roads are so designated. We find that the private roads are those roads which are blocked off one day, usually the first of the year, to show that these roads are not supposed to be maintained. These roads are not supposed to be maintained by government until the landowner indicate to us, well, listen, we turned over these roads to you, we want these roads maintained. Once they're designated as private, we can't touch them. Although we would like to be able to recognize that a lot of these private roads, so-called private roads, need some serious repair, but I don't think we have the legal right to going and repair private roads which are designated as private, as being private. Cheryl.
Thank you. I am very aware that we don't have a legal right, but going forward, I think this is something that needs to be considered, whether it be by legislation or otherwise. My second comment, unless the minister has something to say just now.
Because you're reading my mind, Honourable Member. No, I think it is an issue that, again, doesn't fall squarely under what MTW does now in terms of seeking out private roads to basically repair. But I do think that the concern is genuine. I've certainly had situations, for instance, where how land has been conveyed through, for instance, urban, and there was a right of way, but the persons need a road in order to access the properties, and the road wasn't put in. Now, at this point, they don't have the money to be able to expend to put in the road, but they need access to their properties. And I don't think that we can just, as policymakers, just sit and play dumb. I think we have to find some way to be able to provide those solutions where people can access their properties. And therefore, I think we have to look at it in terms of the whole private roads issue. As the PS was indicating to me earlier, the challenge, I think, in St. Philip and some of the other parishes is that there are large tracts of lands, families have built out those lands, and they have created, in a sense, the roads, not the roads paved by MTW, but they've created pathways to their homes, which then become those roads. And so, again, I don't think that we can ignore it, because the access becomes critical, whether it's an elderly person having to get access because they need an ambulance to their homes, or people taking ill at any point in time. And so there has to be perhaps a separate program that deals specifically with now addressing what has transpired over the course of the last couple of years. But I agree with you that we need to address it. My last comment would be that you have been the beneficiary in St. Philip's North of having a former Minister of Public Works who would have certainly identified the roads in his area to have done, and that is what I spoke about earlier. So on this going down, we're going to really prioritize what really needs to be done across the country.
Thank you. My second comment, and I speak here under my new portfolio and my old portfolio as GP. We are moving on to a decade, a century really, where we are now targeting, apart from the climate change, we are now targeting issues on the non-communicable diseases, where the Ministry of Health and other players have been touting the use of exercise, the benefits of exercise and diet, etc., etc. But I have noticed over the years, including recently, that although roads have been fixed or roads have been placed, there's an obvious, almost glaring absence of sidewalks. And this is something that always bothered me. I watch tourists, for instance, and tourists are not the only people I'm referring to, but I watch tourists, for instance, scotching, for Bajan terms, scotching at the side of the road, trying to get through traffic. Of course, we all know the attendant dangers. What are the possibilities going forward? I'm not saying this year or even next year, that we place things like sidewalks, bicycle lanes, in newly developed roads, so that the residents in the areas can see some form of exercise. Some people prefer to walk to work, which is being encouraged once you live close enough. What are the possibilities of making this a part of normal road repair, to put sidewalks at the side of roads?
Thank you, Honourable Member, for the question. I'm going to ask either CTO or Deputy CTO to respond. But just to say that, it seems so logical to put in the sidewalks and make sure that you have the drainage in when you're doing a road. I mean, I am new to this in terms of the technical side, but it seems very logical. And therefore, especially as we recognize persons with disabilities, again, we have to take into account that persons who have to traverse the sidewalks obviously may not be walking, but they may actually be using a wheelchair. And so the standards that we have to move towards are obviously greater. But I just want to make the point that with the greater responsibility that we have also comes costs. And so while I think that we will move in that direction more and more, I just want to caution that trying to achieve that status that is first world in many cases and is logical at times, obviously I suspect, has been pulled back because of a lack of cost. And I say that because I've had a number of requests even in recent days where, for instance, a main road is being done. And the residents reach out and they say, or the MP reaches out and say, well, Minister, they got some side roads as well that weren't doing as well, that have never been touched as well. It seems logical to do all the minor roads around a major road because then everything looks good. But the reality is they may not have the resources at the time to be able to do everything. So we want everything, but we can't get everything all at the same time. But I will ask CTO perhaps to just break down exactly how the ministry currently plans where it places the sidewalks for the benefit of you, Honourable Member.
Thank you so much. Let me start first with the developments. You're aware, of course, we have now the Planning and Development Department, formerly Tongue and Country Planning Development Office. And we work very closely with that body with respect to the residential developments especially. And we would recommend in those developments that space is left in the development for walking, pedestrians, and cycling. And obviously, we know that children will be around and playing in those areas. We do get pushback, I will say that quite clearly. We get pushback from the developers themselves. Obviously, if we are requesting that they leave more space for pedestrians and that kind of activity, that's less space that they will be able to sell to the landowner to develop their home or whatever the case may be. So we get that pushback first. But that doesn't mean that we still don't recommend that that is left in the developments. The ministry over the years has also had a sidewalk program. We've had sidewalk programs before, particularly we try to to make the priority areas where there are schools. Barbadian children, by and large, still walk to and from school, and we are very fortunate that children as young as they do in Barbados walk to and from school relatively safely when you consider that they have to compete with the motorized vehicles and stuff like that. As I said, we had a sidewalk program where we devoted money specifically for sidewalks in those priority areas. And we're going to be returning to that. We have not forgotten that aspect of road safety in our planning or our design of our roads. But there is always that element of the space allocation. A lot of the areas, the houses are still constructed right up to the road edge. So in order to create that space, you have to consider moving homes. And sometimes that is not the most palatable option. So we tried to do other things. We talked on Friday about traffic calming. So we tried other measures to calm the traffic down when we do not have the space to try to put in facilities for pedestrians like the sidewalks. Bike lanes are something that comes up every once in a while. A similar thing applies. We have far more people walking, though, in Barbados than we have cyclists, and people will say, well, if we had bike lanes, then more people would cycle. I'm not here to debate that because I suspect our climate, in the first place, will probably stop that from happening. We're not the climate where people will hop on their bike and ride to work because by the time they get there, they have to shower and change their clothes. That's just the climate that we live in. So I'm not really seeing that in our future, but certainly we can make walking more palatable and safer because you can also, for short distances, and that's possible. So we are still promoting that we will be putting in sidewalks, and we still, as I said, have road safety aspect to our road improvement plans.
Thank you. I dare say you're wrong with respect to the bicyclists, though. If you come up to the country, St. Philip, you can pass on any weekend 30 or 40 or 50 riders, and it is becoming a big thing. We need to progress to that stage. I would not take it for granted that we are not first world status. We aren't there yet, but this is the only way we can get there. If you don't spend it on one side with the sidewalks and the bike lanes, you're going to spend it on the other end with health and the increasing numbers of NCDs and so on. This is basically my comment. The last one I had to comment on or ask a question, I am getting back to the issue of the signage as well on the road. I had signage and things like speed bumps. With respect to the signage, I am told that these were initially the jobs of the individual depots of the area, and at one point that seemed to have been working efficiently, and now it's in a single area. What is the rationale for that if it had worked previously so that each depot could address their areas? If I may ask, that's the final question.
Yes, simply put, we lost staff. So what's left, we consolidated in one place.
Let's do it forever. Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Honourable Member for St. James Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I beg that you do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Our member for St. James Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that the Honourable House be suspended until 2:35 this afternoon.
2:35? 2:35?
2:35, sir.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 2:35 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 2:35 p.m.